scratching of the Mont Blanc fountain pen against the divorce decree sounded louder than a gunshot in the silent courtroom. Geoffrey Harrington didn't just sign his name, he carved it with the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. He capped the pen, a smug grin curling the corner of his mouth as he slid the papers toward his soon-to-be ex-wife, Lacey. He glanced toward the back of the room where his mistress sat, barely concealing her excitement. Geoffrey thought he was signing away a boring marriage to keep his fortune. He had no idea he was actually signing his own death warrant. The judge wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at a sealed red envelope that had just been placed on his bench, an envelope that would turn Geoffrey's victory into total ruin. The air inside the King County Superior courtroom was stale, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old anxiety. Outside, the Seattle rain hammered against the high windows, a relentless grey rhythm that matched Lacey Winslow's demeanour. She sat hunched at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, wearing a grey wool dress that had seen better days. It was a stark contrast to the man sitting 6 feet away. Geoffrey Harrington looked like $1 million, mostly because he was wearing at least 5,000 of it. His navy bespoke suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, and the Rolex Submariner on his wrist glinted under the fluorescent lights. He checked the time impatiently. 2:14 p.m. He had a reservation at Canlis at 6:00 p.m. to celebrate, and he didn't want traffic to ruin the mood. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Harold Whittaker said, his voice grave and gravelly, echoing from the high bench. "You understand that by signing this decree, you are finalizing the dissolution of your marriage to Lacey Winslow. The division of assets as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement will be executed immediately." "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," Geoffrey said, his voice smooth and confident. He didn't even look at Lacey. Why would he? She was the past, a stepping stone. Sitting in the back row was Vanessa Cole. She was 24, blonde, and wearing a red dress that was slightly too bold for a courtroom. She caught Geoffrey's eye and winked. They had already picked out the new penthouse in Bellevue. The prenuptial agreement Geoffrey had forced Lacey to sign 10 years ago was ironclad. Lacey would get a modest stipend for 2 years, and the old Honda. Geoffrey would keep Harrington Logistics, the tech investments, the lake house, and the prestige. "Lacey," Geoffrey whispered, leaning over just enough so only she could hear. "Don't make a scene. Just sign it. You're lucky I'm giving you anything at all." Lacey slowly raised her head. Her eyes, usually soft and yielding, held a strange, glassy quality today. She didn't look angry. She looked resigned, or perhaps prepared. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and took the pen Geoffrey offered. "I just want it to be over, Geoffrey," she said softly. "Then sign," he urged. She signed. Lacey Winslow. She dropped the Harrington immediately, as if shedding a heavy, wet coat. Geoffrey let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was done. He was free. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, ready to shake his lawyer's hand and walk out into his new life. "Sit down, Mr. Harrington," Judge Whittaker boomed. Geoffrey paused, confused. "Your Honor, the papers are signed. We're done here." "I said sit down," the judge repeated, his eyes narrowing behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The bailiff moved a step closer to the tables. Geoffrey's lawyer, a nervous man named Attorney Preston, tugged on Geoffrey's sleeve. "Sit, Geoffrey. Let's hear him out." Geoffrey sank back into his leather chair, annoyed. "What is this? A clerical error?" Judge Whittaker didn't answer immediately. He reached under his desk and produced a thick, heavy document, sealed inside a dark red velvet envelope. The wax seal on the back was broken, but the crest stamped into it was unmistakable to anyone who knew the history of the region. It was the crest of the Winslow family, Lacey's family. "Before these proceedings can be officially closed," the judge said, holding the document up, "I am required by state law to execute the conditions of a previously dormant legal instrument. This document was filed with the court registry 12 years ago, with a specific instruction. It was only to be opened and read aloud upon the legal signature of a divorce decree between Geoffrey Harrington and Lacey Winslow." Geoffrey scoffed. "What is that? Some love letter from her dead dad? Look, if she wants the dog, she can have the dog." "This," the judge said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register, "is the last will and testament of Arthur Winslow. Or rather, the hidden codicil to the will." Geoffrey rolled his eyes. "Arthur died broke. He left Lacey that muddy farm and nothing else. This is a waste of time." "Is it?" The judge opened the document. The paper was old, parchment style, heavy and authoritative. "Mr. Harrington, you built your logistics empire, Harrington Logistics, on a parcel of land in the So-Do district, correct?" "Yes," Geoffrey said suspiciously. "I bought that land from Lacey's father for $1 before we got married. It was a wedding gift. It's in my name." "You bought the usage rights," the judge corrected. "You did not read the fine print of the deed transfer, likely because you were too busy rushing the wedding to secure the asset." Lacey remained silent, staring at the table, but her fingers were no longer trembling. "Read the codicil, Your Honor," Lacey said. Her voice was clear, strong. Geoffrey whipped his head around to look at her. It was the first time she had spoken with authority in 5 years. Judge Whittaker adjusted his glasses. Clause 4, Section A. The transfer of the Winslow commercial estate to Geoffrey Harrington is conditional. The land, and any corporate entities built upon said land, shall remain under the stewardship of Mr. Harrington only so long as he remains in a faithful, legal union with my daughter, Lacey Winslow. The room went dead silent. Vanessa in the back stopped chewing her gum. "Excuse me?" Geoffrey chuckled nervously. That's not legal. I own that company. I built the warehouses. I secured the contracts." "You built them on leased land, Mr. Harrington," the judge continued, reading further. "The codicil states, upon the signature of a divorce decree initiated by or agreed to by Mr. Harrington, the ownership of the land, and strictly all permanent structures and businesses attached to the property, reverts immediately to the sole beneficiary, Lacey Winslow." Geoffrey's face went pale. Harrington Logistics wasn't just a company, it was his entire net worth. The warehouses, the fleet, the headquarters, they were all physically located on that massive plot of land. "This is a joke," Geoffrey stammered. He looked at his lawyer. "Preston, tell him this is a joke." Attorney Preston was flipping through his own files, sweating profusely. I didn't check the original land deed, Geoffrey. You told me you owned it outright. You said it was a gift. It was, Geoffrey shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "It was a conditional gift," Lacey said. She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry, and a cold, hard smile was forming on her lips, a mirror of the smirk he had worn just moments ago. "And you just signed the condition away." "I withdraw my signature," Geoffrey yelled, reaching for the papers on the judge's bench. "I rescind it. We aren't divorced." "Bailiff!" Judge Whittaker barked. The uniformed officer stepped forward, blocking Geoffrey's path. Geoffrey stood there, chest heaving, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "The document is signed and notarized, Mr. Harrington," the judge said calmly. "The divorce is legal. The reversion clause is triggered. As of 2:17 p.m. today, Lacey Winslow is the legal owner of the property at 4500 Airport Way. and by the terms of the corporate charter tied to the property address, she is now the controlling shareholder of Harrington Logistics. "You can't do this," Jeffrey hissed. He spun around to point at Lacey. "You set me up. You knew about this." "Of course I knew," Lacey said, standing up. She smoothed the wrinkles in her grey dress. "My father knew what kind of man you were, Jeffrey. He knew you didn't love me. You loved the land access for your distribution center. He told me that if I ever found the courage to leave you, or if you ever got bored enough to discard me, he would make sure I didn't leave empty-handed. I have millions in offshore accounts," Jeffrey bluffed, though his voice wavered. "I don't need the company." Lacey tilted her head. "Actually, Attorney Preston, isn't the company the guarantor for Jeffrey's personal lines of credit?" Preston looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Yes. Technically. The loans for the yacht, the penthouse, and the liquid capital, they are all secured against the valuation of Harrington Logistics. "So," Lacey reasoned, her voice deadly calm, "if Jeffrey is no longer the owner of the collateral, the banks will call those loans immediately." Jeffrey felt the room spinning. He looked back at Vanessa. She was already gathering her purse. She stood up, checking her phone, avoiding his gaze entirely. She was typing a message, probably to her backup plan. "Vanessa," Jeffrey called out weakly. She looked up, her expression flat. "I have to go, Jeffrey. This seems messy. Call me when you fix it." She turned and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking a rhythmic retreat. Jeffrey slumped back into his chair. He looked at the judge, then at Lacey. "Lacey, please, we can talk about this. We can nullify the divorce. I made a mistake. We can work it out." Lacey laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Work it out? Like we worked it out when I found the second phone in your car? Or when you missed my mother's funeral to go to Cabo for business? No, Jeffrey. The time for working it out was 5 years ago." She picked up her purse. It was a cheap, worn leather bag, but she carried it like it was a Birkin. "I'll expect your resignation on my desk by tomorrow morning," Lacey said. "And Jeffrey, you have 30 days to vacate the house. The land that the lake house sits on? That was part of the Winslow estate, too." Jeffrey watched her walk away. He had walked into that courtroom a king. He was sitting there now, a pauper in a $5,000 suit. The days following the court verdict were a blur of chaos for Jeffrey. He spent most of his time screaming into his phone in his penthouse, which he was rapidly realizing he could no longer afford. "What do you mean my accounts are frozen?" Jeffrey roared, pacing the floor of his living room, kicking a discarded pizza box out of the way. The maid had quit 2 days ago when the automatic payment bounced. "Mr. Harrington." The bank manager's voice was cool and detached on the other end. "The assets used to secure your platinum status are currently under legal dispute and have been transferred to the Winslow Trust. Until the audit is complete, we have to freeze your personal lines of credit." Jeffrey threw the phone against the sofa. It bounced harmlessly onto the cushions. He walked to the window looking out over the Seattle skyline. It was grey and drizzling, typical for October. He used to own this view. Now it felt like the city was closing in on him. He needed a drink, but the liquor cabinet was running low, and he couldn't even use his Amex to restock it. He needed leverage. He needed dirt. He grabbed his keys, his car, an Aston Martin was still in the garage, thank God, and drove to the one place he knew he shouldn't go, the Harrington Logistics headquarters, or, as it was now, legally being rebranded, Winslow Global. The drive to the Sodo district was painful. Every mile reminded him of the empire he had built. He had taken a muddy lot and turned it into the premier shipping hub of the Pacific Northwest. He had bribed officials, cut corners, and crushed unions to make it profitable. And now, Lacey, quiet, mousy. Lacey, who liked gardening and knitting, was sitting in his chair. He pulled up to the security gate. The guard, a man named Miller, who Geoffrey had employed for 6 years, stepped out of the booth. "Open the gate, Miller," Geoffrey said, rolling down the window. Miller didn't move. He looked uncomfortable. "I can't do that, Mr. Harrington." "It's Geoffrey. I hired you. Open the damn gate." "I have new orders, sir. Your clearance has been revoked. You're on the do not admit list." Geoffrey felt a vein in his forehead throb. "Whose orders?" "The CEO's, sir." "Ms. Winslow." Geoffrey slammed the steering wheel. "She doesn't know how to run a shipping company. She's going to drive it into the ground in a week. Let me in. I need to get my files from my office." "Your personal effects were boxed up and sent to your attorney's office this morning," Miller said, his face impassive. "Please turn around, sir, or I'm authorized to call the police." Geoffrey stared at Miller. He saw no loyalty in the man's eyes, only the indifferent adherence to whoever signed the paycheck, and Geoffrey wasn't signing checks anymore. He reversed the car, tires screeching, and peeled away. He wasn't done. If Lacey wanted a war, she was going to get one. She might have the land, but he knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. He drove to a dingy bar in Pioneer Square, the kind of place where lawyers didn't go. He sat in a dark booth and pulled out a burner phone he kept for emergencies. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "It's me," Geoffrey said when the line connected. "I need a favor. I need you to dig into Arthur Winslow's past. The will, I think it's a forgery. I think the old man was senile. I want you to find anything that proves Lacey manipulated him." "That's expensive work, Geoffrey," a raspy voice replied. "You got the cash?" Geoffrey touched the Rolex on his wrist. It was worth 20 grand on the secondary market. "I'll have the cash. Just get started." He hung up, a dark plan forming in his mind. Lacey thought she had won because of a piece of paper. But Geoffrey played dirty. He was going to prove that the hidden will was a fraud. And if that didn't work, he was going to destroy the company, so there was nothing left for her to inherit. Meanwhile, high above the warehouse floor in the executive suite, Lacey Winslow spun the leather chair around to face the window. She took a sip of herbal tea. The office still smelled like Geoffrey's expensive cologne, a scent she used to associate with fear. Now, it just smelled like desperation. Her assistant, a young woman named Sarah, knocked on the open door. "Ms. Winslow, the board of directors is ready for you in the conference room. They seem anxious." Lacey stood up. She wasn't wearing the grey wool dress anymore. She was wearing a tailored black blazer and sharp trousers. She looked like a woman who had survived a storm and learned how to control the lightning. "Let them be anxious, Sarah," Lacey said calmly. "It keeps them honest. Let's go." As Lacey walked down the hallway, she knew this was only the beginning. Geoffrey wouldn't go quietly. He was a narcissist. He would burn the world down before he let a woman rule it. But there was one thing Geoffrey didn't know. The will wasn't the only secret Arthur Winslow had left her. There was a safe in this office, hidden behind a panel Geoffrey had never noticed because he was too busy looking at himself in the mirror. And inside that safe was the evidence that would send Geoffrey Harrington not just to the poorhouse, but to federal prison. She just had to wait for him to make his move. The combination to the hidden wall safe was not a random string of numbers. It was 040988, April 9th, 1988. It was the date Arthur Winslow had bought the very first truck for his company. Geoffrey Harrington had sat in this office for 10 years and never once suspected that the mahogany paneling behind his desk chair concealed a steel-reinforced vault. He had been too busy looking at the skyline, dreaming of more, to realize the foundation of his power was literally watching his back. Lacey typed in the code. The mechanism clicked with a heavy, satisfying thud. The door swung open, revealing not stacks of cash or gold bars, but a single, leather-bound ledger and a portable hard drive. She sat at the massive oak desk, her desk now, and opened the ledger. Her father, Arthur, had been a meticulous man. He trusted people, yes, but he also verified. Before his stroke, he had suspected Jeffrey was using the company logistics network for something off the books. He hadn't been able to prove it before he died, but he had left notes. Lacey flipped through the pages. Her breath hitched. The handwriting changed halfway through, from her father's shaky script to the precise, jagged notation of Jeffrey. Entry: March 12th, 2022. Shipment 499B. Destination: Macau. Manifest: Industrial Textiles. Actual: Class C restricted microprocessors. Jeffrey hadn't just been cheating on her with women, he had been cheating the federal government. He was bypassing export sanctions, using Harrington Logistics to smuggle high-tech components to foreign entities that were on the restricted trade list. It was treason adjacent and highly profitable. Lacey plugged in the hard drive. It contained scans of falsified shipping manifests, emails to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, and bank transfer records. It was a smoking gun. It was enough to put Jeffrey away for 20 years. She reached for the phone to call the FBI. Her hand hovered over the receiver. "No," she whispered to the empty room. If she turned this in now, the government would freeze all company assets. The investigation would take years. The 4,000 employees who worked for Winslow Global, innocent families who relied on these paychecks, would be out of work while the feds tore the company apart. The stock would tank to zero. Jeffrey would go to jail, but he would take her father's legacy down with him. She needed to surgically remove the cancer, not kill the patient. She needed Jeffrey to incriminate himself in something new, something that didn't implicate the company's past operations. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in a flickering Motel 6 off the interstate, Jeffrey Harrington was staring at a water stain on the ceiling. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. He had sold the Rolex to a pawn shop on 4th Avenue for a fraction of its value just to have liquid cash. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Attorney Preston. "Stop calling me, Jeffrey. I can't represent you anymore. Conflict of interest. The Bar Association is already asking questions about the deed transfer." "Coward," Jeffrey spat, tossing the phone onto the cheap duvet. He heard a knock at the door. 3 rhythmic raps. Jeffrey opened it to reveal a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. Victor Cray was a fixer Jeffrey had used years ago to intimidate a union rep. He wasn't cheap, and he wasn't nice. "You look like hell, Harrington," Victor said, stepping inside without an invitation. He wore a nondescript windbreaker and a baseball cap. "I'm having a cash flow problem," Jeffrey muttered, pouring himself a glass of tap water. "But it's temporary. I'm going to get it all back. I just need one little push." "You couldn't pay me to walk your dog right now," Victor said, leaning against the doorframe. "Why am I here?" "Because I know where the bodies are buried," Jeffrey said, his eyes gleaming with a manic energy. "Lacey thinks she won. She thinks she owns the kingdom, but she doesn't know the codes to the tracking software. She doesn't know the overrides. So I need you to arrange a shipment," Jeffrey said, lowering his voice, "from a supplier in Colombia. I can use my old admin codes to insert a container onto a Winslow Global ship docking in Tacoma on Friday. It will look like a legitimate import of coffee beans." Victor raised an eyebrow. "And what's actually in the coffee?" "Nothing," Jeffrey smiled cruelly. That's the beauty of it. We don't need real drugs. We just need the suspicion of drugs. I need you to tip off Customs and Border Protection. Tell them there's 50 kilos of cocaine in container 77 Bravo. You want to raid your own company. It's not my company right now, Jeffrey hissed. It's hers. If a Winslow Global ship gets flagged for narcotics trafficking 3 days after she takes over, the board of directors will panic. The stock will crash. The creditors will call in the debt. She'll be forced to declare bankruptcy within a month. And then? And then, Jeffrey said, leaning forward. I swoop in with a private equity group I'm putting together. We buy the distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. I get my company back, and Lacey goes back to the trailer park where she belongs. Victor stared at him for a long moment. You really hate her, don't you? I hate losing, Jeffrey corrected. Do we have a deal? Victor nodded slowly. It'll cost you 50 grand, up front. I have 20 from the watch, Jeffrey said. I'll get you the rest when I'm CEO again. Victor considered this, then shrugged. Fine. But if you stiff me, Harrington, I won't sue you. I'll just find you. Friday arrived with a torrential downpour, the kind of Seattle rain that felt like it was trying to wash the city into the Sound. Lacey stood in the control tower of the Winslow Global Distribution Hub. Below her, the massive container ship, the Arthur W., was being offloaded by giant cranes. It was a mechanical ballet, huge steel boxes swinging through the air. Miss Winslow, Sarah said, stepping up beside her. Sarah looked nervous. We have a problem at Gate 4. Customs is swarming the dock. Lacey didn't flinch. She watched as 4 black SUVs sped onto the pier, lights flashing. Armed agents in windbreakers labeled CBP jumped out, accompanied by K9 units. They bypassed the standard inspection lanes and headed straight for a stack of containers being lowered from the ship. They received a tip, Lacey said calmly. We need to get legal down there, Sarah said, reaching for her phone. No, Lacey said, placing a hand on Sarah's arm. Let them look. But if they find something, they won't find anything, Sarah. Not what they're looking for, at least. Down on the dock, the agents cut the lock on container 77 Bravo. They threw open the doors. A mountain of burlap coffee sacks tumbled out. The dogs barked and strained at their leashes, rushing into the container. The agents began slashing the bags open, spilling unroasted green coffee beans onto the wet concrete. They searched for an hour. They drilled into the pallets. They scanned the walls of the container. Nothing. Up in the tower, Lacey's phone rang. She answered it on speaker. It's done, a deep voice said. It wasn't Jeffrey. It was the head of security for the port. Did you get the footage? Lacey asked. Crystal clear, Miss Winslow. We have unauthorized access on the server logs at 3 a.m. last night. Someone used an old admin credential, user ID G. Harrington, to digitally alter the manifest and flag the container for priority offloading. We also traced the IP address of the tip-off call to CBP. It came from a burner phone, pinging off a tower near the SeaTac Motel 6. Lacey smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. Thank you. Send the package to the district attorney. Jeffrey had made a fatal error. He assumed Lacey was technologically illiterate. He assumed that because she liked gardening, she didn't understand how digital footprints worked. But Lacey had spent the last 5 years lonely and bored. She had taken online courses in cybersecurity and forensic accounting just to pass the time. She knew exactly when Jeffrey logged into the system because she had never deactivated his account. She had only put it in sandbox mode. Jeffrey thought he was manipulating the live shipping database. In reality, he had been playing a video game. He had assigned a fake container to a real ship. The container the police were searching was full of perfectly legal coffee belonging to Starbucks. However, the damage to the public perception was real. Within hours, the news broke. Winslow Global raided by feds. The stock price dipped 12%. The board of directors called an emergency meeting at 5 p.m. The conference room was tense. 12 men in grey suits sat around the table, looking at Lacey like she was a substitute teacher who had lost control of the class. "This is a disaster." Roger Banks, the chairman of the board, slammed his fist on the table. "Lacey, we respected your father, but you have been CEO for less than a week, and we have federal agents tearing apart our inventory. The market is losing confidence." "It was a false alarm, Roger," Lacey said, sitting at the head of the table. "No contraband was found." "It doesn't matter," Banks shouted. "The rumor is enough to kill our contracts with the Asian distributors. We need stable leadership. We need someone who knows the industry." "Someone like Jeffrey?" Lacey asked softly. The room went quiet. Banks shifted in his seat. "Jeffrey is problematic personally, but he ran a tight ship. The numbers were better under him." "The numbers were fake," Lacey said. She slid the black ledger down the long table. Banks looked at it. "What is this?" "That represents the better numbers you liked so much," Lacey said. "Jeffrey was smuggling restricted tech." "That raid today?" "That was Jeffrey trying to frame me. He tried to plant drugs, or the idea of drugs, to tank the stock so he could buy you all out." The board members murmured. Banks opened the ledger, his eyes widening as he saw the entries. "He tried to destroy this company today because he couldn't have it." Lacey stood up, her voice rising. "He risked your dividends, your reputations, and the freedom of your employees just to soothe his ego. I am the only thing standing between this company and a federal indictment. If you fire me, I hand this ledger to the FBI tomorrow, and Winslow Global ceases to exist. If you keep me, I use this leverage to force a quiet settlement, and we clean house." Banks looked at the ledger, then at Lacey. He closed the book. "What do you need us to do?" Banks asked. "I need you to authorize a hostile buyout," Lacey said. "Jeffrey still holds 5% of the shares in his personal portfolio. I want them, and I want to meet him. Tonight." Jeffrey was feeling good. He sat in the corner booth of the dive bar, nursing a whiskey that was actually top shelf this time. He had seen the news. Winslow Global stock tumbles, federal raid at Tacoma Port. He didn't know the raid had come up empty. He just knew the stock was down. His phone rang. It was Lacey. "Jeffrey," she said. She sounded tired, defeated. "Hello, darling," Jeffrey smirked. "Rough day at the office?" "You win," she whispered. "The board. They want you back. They want a consultant to navigate the crisis." Jeffrey felt a rush of adrenaline, so potent it was almost sexual. "I told you, Lacey, you're a gardener. I'm a titan. I built that place." "Can you meet me?" she asked. "At the old warehouse 4? The one where we had our first date?" It was a sentimental touch, one that made Jeffrey sneer. She was trying to manipulate him with nostalgia. Pathetic. "I can be there in 20 minutes, Jeffrey said. "Bring the corporate seal." "I will," she said. Jeffrey hung up and tossed a $100 bill on the table. He walked out to his rental car, a Ford Focus, humiliating, and drove toward the industrial district. Warehouse 4 was an older building, separate from the main high-tech hub. It was dark, illuminated only by the orange glow of street lamps reflecting off the wet pavement. Jeffrey parked and walked in through the side door. The cavernous space was empty, smelling of dust and oil. In the center of the room, under a single hanging work light, stood a table. Lacey was sitting there. She had the corporate seal and a stack of documents. "You came alone," Jeffrey said, his voice echoing. "Smart girl." "I didn't want a scene," Lacey said, not looking up. Jeffrey walked over, his shoes clicking on the concrete. He picked up the documents. They were transfer papers, reinstating him as executive consultant with a path to CEO. "You know," Jeffrey said, pulling a pen from his pocket, "I almost feel bad for you. If you had just stayed in the kitchen and let me do my job, we could have stayed married. You could have lived in luxury, ignoring the things you didn't need to know." "Ignorance is expensive, Jeffrey," Lacey said. "Sign here," Jeffrey pointed to the line, "and then get out of my chair." "Aren't you going to read it?" Lacey asked. "I know what it says. It says I win." "Actually," a voice spoke from the shadows behind a stack of crates. "It says you're confessing to attempted corporate espionage, wire fraud, and violation of the Export Administration Act." Jeffrey froze. He spun around. Detective Callahan stepped out, his badge glinting in the dim light. Behind him were 2 uniformed officers, and behind them was Victor Cray in handcuffs. "Victor," Jeffrey gasped. "Sorry, Harrington," Victor shrugged. "She paid better, and she offered me immunity." Jeffrey looked back at Lacey. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. She was looking at him with the same pity one might have for a stepped-on cockroach. You set me up," Jeffrey stammered. "No, Jeffrey," Lacey stood up. "I just let you be yourself. I knew you'd try something dirty. I knew you'd call Victor. I knew you'd use your old login. I just recorded it all." The coffee beans, Jeffrey realized. There were no drugs. Starbucks was very confused about the delay, Lacey noted dryly. "But we smoothed it over." Detective Callahan stepped forward. "Jeffrey Harrington, you are under arrest." "You can't prove anything," Jeffrey shouted, backing away. "This is hearsay. Victor is a criminal. His word means nothing." "We don't need Victor's word," Lacey said. She held up the black ledger. "We have the book, Jeffrey. The one you kept in the safe behind the panel. The one detailing every illegal chip you sold to foreign nationals." Jeffrey's face went white. He looked at the ledger, then at the open side door. He could run. He could try to make it to the border. He bolted. "Grab him!" Callahan yelled. Jeffrey sprinted toward the exit, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was fast, fueled by panic. He burst out the door into the rainy night and ran straight into the chest of a man standing guard outside. Jeffrey bounced off and fell into a puddle. He looked up. It was Miller, the security guard he had yelled at a week ago. Miller looked down at him, a satisfied grin on his face. "Sorry, sir. You're on the do not admit list." The officers swarmed Jeffrey, pinning him to the wet asphalt. As they cuffed his hands behind his back, Jeffrey turned his head to see Lacey standing in the doorway of the warehouse. She was silhouetted against the light, a tall, unshakable figure. She didn't say anything. She simply watched as they dragged him toward the patrol car. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just turned around, walked back inside, and turned off the lights. The indictment came down like a hammer. 14 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of corporate espionage, and 1 count of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, a charge that stuck due to the intent, even if the beans were clean. Jeffrey Harrington was sitting in a holding cell at the King County Correctional Facility, trading his Italian wool for orange polyester. But Jeffrey was not a man who accepted defeat. He still had 1 card left to play. His liquid assets were frozen, but he had a rainy day fund in cryptocurrency that the feds hadn't found yet. He used his 1 phone call not to call his mother, but to call Dominic Archer. Dominic Archer was a defense attorney who made sharks look like goldfish. He cost $1,000 an hour and had a reputation for getting murderers off on technicalities. He arrived at the jail, smelling of sandalwood and moral flexibility. They have you dead to rights, Geoffrey, Archer said, sitting on the metal stool across from Geoffrey behind the plexiglass. He didn't even open his briefcase. The ledger is admissible. The testimony from Victor Cray is damning. The video footage is high definition. I don't pay you to tell me the weather, Dominic, Geoffrey hissed into the receiver. I pay you to find a leak in the roof. Get the ledger thrown out, fruit of the poisonous tree. It was found in a safe belonging to the company, turned over by the current CEO. It's admissible, Dominic countered. However, we might be able to attack the chain of custody. Or better yet, we attack the credibility of the witness. Lacey? Geoffrey scoffed. She's a saint, you can't attack her. Not Lacey, Dominic smiled, revealing teeth that had been whitened to an unnatural brightness. The other one. Vanessa Cole. Geoffrey paused. Vanessa? She left. She's gone. The prosecution has subpoenaed her, Dominic revealed. She's their star character witness. She's going to testify about your spending habits, your late-night phone calls, the way you bragged about bypassing customs. If she talks, you get 20 years. If we destroy her, you might walk on a mistrial. The trial began 3 months later. The media dubbed it the logistics of lies. The courtroom was packed. Lacey sat in the front row, looking stoic. Geoffrey sat at the defense table, clean-shaven, wearing a suit Dominic had brought him. He looked like the victim. When Vanessa took the stand, she looked nervous. She avoided Geoffrey's eyes. Ms. Cole, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Monica Reed, began. Did Mr. Harrington ever discuss his business dealings with you? Yes, Vanessa said, her voice trembling. He told me he was untouchable. He said the laws were for poor people. He used to laugh about how easy it was to bribe the dock workers in Macau. The jury scribbled notes. It looked bad. Then Dominic Archer stood up for cross-examination. He walked toward Vanessa like a predator, stalking a wounded gazelle. Ms. Cole, Dominic purred. You were Mr. Harrington's mistress for 3 years, correct? Yes. And during that time, you accepted gifts, jewelry, cars, an apartment in Bellevue? Yes, and you knew he was married? Yes. Dominic turned to the jury. So, we have established that you have no issue with moral ambiguity if the price is right. Tell me, Miss Cole, isn't it true that you were the one who introduced Mr. Harrington to Victor Cray? Vanessa's eyes went wide. What? No, I didn't. Dominic pulled a piece of paper from his jacket. I have here a phone log from 2023. It shows a call from your cell phone to Victor Cray's burner number, a call that lasted 20 minutes. This was 2 weeks before Geoffrey supposedly hired him. The courtroom gasped. Geoffrey looked at Dominic in shock. He hadn't known this. I, Vanessa stammered. Is it possible, Miss Cole, Dominic boomed, that you were the mastermind, that you manipulated a stressed businessman into illegal activities so you could skim money off the top, and now you're testifying against him to cut a deal for yourself? No, that's a lie, Vanessa screamed, standing up. Geoffrey told me to call him. He used my phone because he was paranoid. So you admit you facilitated the contact, Dominic said calmly. No further questions. Dominic had done it. He had muddied the waters. He had made the jury doubt whether Geoffrey was the villain or just a patsy for a greedy mistress. The reasonable doubt was starting to grow. While Geoffrey was fighting for his life in court, Lacey was fighting for her company's soul. The scandal of the trial had scared away investors. Winslow Global shares were trading at an all-time low. It was the perfect storm for a shark to attack, and the shark's name was Benedict Cates. Benedict Cates was the CEO of Cates Trans Pacific, Winslow Global's largest competitor. He was a man who didn't build companies. He bought them, stripped them for parts, and sold the scrap. He requested a meeting with Lacey not at the office, but at the Seattle Art Museum. He liked to surround himself with culture to hide his barbarism. "Lacey," Benedict said, extending a hand that felt like cold marble. "You look tired. This trial must be exhausting." "I'm fine, Benedict," Lacey said, ignoring his hand. "What do you want?" "I want to save you," he said, gesturing to a painting of a shipwreck. "Winslow Global is sinking. The market hates uncertainty. Even if Jeffrey goes to jail, the taint is there. Your vendors are looking for an exit." "We just signed a renewal with Amazon," Lacey lied smoothly. "For 1 quarter, Benedict corrected her. He knew. "Here's the offer. Kate's Trans-Pacific buys 100% of Winslow Global shares at $12 a share. That's a 20% premium over today's market price. You walk away with $50 million. You can go back to your garden. You never have to see a lawyer again." "And what happens to my employees?" Lacey asked. Benedict shrugged. "Efficiencies will be made. We'll keep the drivers, the admin staff, the warehouse managers, the pension fund. Well, that's just overhead." "You'll fire 3,000 people," Lacey realized, "and you'll raid the pension fund to pay off the debt you used to buy us." "It's just business, Lacey. Don't be sentimental. It's what your father would have done." "You didn't know my father," Lacey said, her voice hardening. "My father built that company to feed families, not to buy yachts. The answer is no." Benedict's smile vanished. "Then I'll go directly to the shareholders. I'll initiate a hostile takeover. With the stock this low, I can buy a controlling interest by the end of the week. And when I do, I'll fire you with cause for mismanagement. You'll leave with nothing." Lacey walked out of the museum with her heart pounding. She knew he was right. She didn't have the capital to fight a hostile takeover. She needed a white knight. But who would invest in a company whose former CEO was on trial for treason? She drove back to the office, her mind racing. She went to the safe, the same safe where she had found the ledger. She sat in her father's chair and closed her eyes. Think, Lacey. What would Arthur do? Arthur Winslow was a man who prepared for everything. He had hidden the will. He had hidden the ledger. Was there something else? She remembered a story her father used to tell her about the dead man's switch. He said every smart man has a button that, if pressed, blows up the bridge so the enemy can't cross. She began tearing apart the office. She pulled books off the shelves. She checked under the rugs. Finally, she looked at the framed portrait of her father hanging behind the desk. It was a standard oil painting, except the frame was unusually thick. She took the painting down. On the back, taped to the canvas, was a small silver key and a note. For Lacey, in case the wolves come. The key didn't fit the safe. It didn't fit the desk. Lacey looked around wildly. Then she remembered. The old grandfather clock in the corner of the lobby. It had been there since 1970. She ran down to the lobby, ignoring the confused looks of the receptionist. She opened the glass face of the clock. Inside the wooden casing, near the pendulum, was a tiny keyhole. She inserted the silver key and turned it. A false bottom in the clock space popped open. Inside was a file folder labeled Project Evergreen. Lacey opened it and read. Her eyes widened. It wasn't money. It was a patent. Arthur Winslow hadn't just been moving boxes. 10 years ago, he had quietly funded a startup, developing a revolutionary automated sorting algorithm, an AI that could increase shipping efficiency by 40%. He had bought the patent outright and hidden it, waiting for the technology to mature. The patent was owned by Winslow Global, and it was worth billions. Benedict Cates didn't know about Project Evergreen. Jeffrey didn't know. No one knew. Lacey smiled. She didn't need a buyer. She had the golden ticket. The next day, Lacey issued a press release revealing Project Evergreen. She announced a strategic partnership with a major tech giant to license the software. Winslow Global stock skyrocketed. It jumped from $10 to $45 in 3 hours. Benedict Cates called her, screaming. His hostile takeover was dead in the water. He couldn't afford the shares anymore. Lacey hung up on him mid-sentence. But the victory at the office was overshadowed by the conclusion of the trial. Despite Dominic Archer's brilliant defense, the jury couldn't ignore the sheer volume of evidence. The Vanessa defense had created doubt about the drugs, but it couldn't explain the wire fraud or the export violations in the ledger, which were in Jeffrey's handwriting. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, Jeffrey stood up, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jeffrey Harrington." Jeffrey held his breath. "Guilty on all counts." Jeffrey slumped. Dominic Archer immediately began packing his briefcase, already mentally calculating his billable hours. The sentencing hearing was 1 week later. Judge Whittaker, the same judge who had presided over the divorce, sat on the bench. He seemed to take a grim satisfaction in finishing what he had started. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Whittaker said, "you had everything. Wealth, status, a loyal wife, and you threw it all away for greed. You smirked at the law, sir. You are not smirking now." Judge Whittaker sentenced Jeffrey to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 12. 6 months later, Lacey walked through the heavy steel doors of the Federal Correctional Institution at Sheridan. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and misery. She sat in the visitation room. Jeffrey was brought in. He looked terrible. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair was thinning, and the arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He sat down and picked up the phone. "You came," he said, his voice raspy. "I wanted to see if you were okay," Lacey said honestly. Despite everything, seeing him like this was tragic. "I'm surviving," Jeffrey said. "I hear the company is doing well." "Project Evergreen?" "I never knew." "Arthur didn't trust you with it," Lacey said. "He knew you'd sell it for quick cash. He saved it for someone who would build the future." Jeffrey laughed bitterly. He was always 3 steps ahead. And you turned out to be just like him. Cold. "Not cold, Jeffrey. Strong. There's a difference." "Why are you here, Lacey? To gloat? To show me your new Italian shoes?" "No." Lacey reached into her purse. She pulled out a document and pressed it against the glass. Jeffrey squinted. It was a deed to a small cabin in Montana. "What is this?" "It's the only thing left," Lacey said. "The government took everything else. The penthouse, the cars, the accounts. But this cabin, it was in your mother's name, and she left it to you. I bought the tax lien on it so it wouldn't be auctioned off." Jeffrey stared at her. "Why?" "Because when you get out of here in 12 years, Jeffrey, you're going to be 55 years old with nothing. No friends, no money, no reputation. You'll have nowhere to go. So you're giving me a house." "I'm giving you a place to hide," Lacey said, standing up. "Because I don't hate you anymore, Jeffrey. I pity you. You signed away your life for a smirk. I don't want you to die on the street. I want you to sit in that cabin, alone, and think about the day you signed those divorce papers. That is my revenge. Your survival is my revenge." Lacey hung up the phone. Jeffrey watched her walk away. He placed his hand on the glass. For the first time in his life, tears streamed down his face. He wasn't crying because he was in prison. He was crying because he finally realized that the woman he had discarded was the only person in the world who had shown him any mercy. Lacey walked out into the bright sunshine. Her driver was waiting. "Where to, Ms. Winslow?" Lacey looked at her phone. She had a meeting with the tech partners in Tokyo, then a gala in London. "To the airport," Lacey said, putting on her sunglasses. "We have a lot of work to do." As the car pulled away, Lacey didn't look back at the prison. She looked forward, to the road ahead, owned and operated by Winslow Global. She was no longer just Arthur Winslow's daughter or Jeffrey Harrington's ex-wife. She was Lacey Winslow, and she had only just begun to write her own story. Sometimes, the biggest mistake a person can make is underestimating the quiet ones. Jeffrey Harrington thought he was the main character of the world, but he learned the hard way that arrogance comes with a heavy price tag. Lacey didn't just win a lawsuit. She reclaimed her identity and proved that true power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about holding the right keys. What did you think of Jeffrey's punishment? Did he deserve the mercy Lacey showed him at the end, or should she have left him with nothing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this saga of twists, betrayal, and justice, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching.